always, beneficial to know what's going on with the economy. And like today's forecast, we didn't just talk about what they project for the future, but we spoke about, what's happened in the past and how that's kind of affecting where the market is today.
I have heard of Ted Jones before. I actually have seen him speak once before. And I always think that the information he provides is very insightful. It's very useful. And although it was primarily a commercial, talk, I'm in residential, I think it applies to both, residential and commercial.
I would say that Ted is great at mixing, humor with the numbers. So he's really relatable. His data are very on point and straightforward. So it's a great way to learn and to educate yourself on the market and on the economy overall.
Realtors, your mission, should you choose to accept it, is on November 20th.
At the Houston Community Collective from 9:30 to 3:30, it's the 2025 Housing Symposium, and it's going live.
The theme, mission, possible. The challenge, Houston's housing market. The objective, actionable strategies and real results.
You'll hear from expert speakers, dive into panel discussions, and get insights from the leaders shaping the future of housing.
Network with the top professionals, tackle critical issues, and leave ready to make an impact. Every move counts.
So mark your calendars, gear up, the 2025 Housing Symposium, Mission Possible.
And remember, failure is not an option.
With TRLP, I think the biggest thing that I've taken away is all of the friendships and the memories that we've had over the past several months. And I'm going to miss being able to see everyone, for at least 6 to 8 hours, at least once a month. And I'm definitely going to miss that, but I know that we're going to grow in relationships and bring that into our personal lives as well as professional lives. So I'm really going to miss all the friendships and the people that I had on a day-to-day basis.
It's good. I'm gonna miss the camaraderie, but we're gonna keep the camaraderie alive, so we made it.
Again, for me, companionship, all of the relationships, a big plus, and I wouldn't want to be here with anyone else.
Class of 2025, the best
ever.
Good morning and welcome to Member Focus Monday. I'm Christina Schaefer, Director of Social Media and Sponsorships for HAR. Today we are joined by Dr. Jorge Barro, economist with the Real Estate Center at Texas A&M University. We're going to take a look at where things are for 2025 and what realtors should be watching as we enter 2026. We're going to talk about interest rates, the job market, housing demand, and so much more. We're going to cover the major forces shaping the market and what that could mean for real estate professionals and their clients. Welcome to the program, George.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us again. You joined us a while back, but we really wanted to dive in deeper with you as we're getting to the end of the year and starting to think about 2026. I think it's a good time for an update. But before we get into all of that, let's kick things off. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your role at the Real Estate Center at Texas A&M.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm an economist with the Texas Real Estate Research Center at Texas A&M University. I'm a macroeconomist, so a lot of what I do is, trying to gain insights about the U.S. economy and the Texas economy and relay those insights to the real estate community. I publish a monthly report on the Texas Economic Outlook where we cover a lot of national level topics as well. And it's what I spend a lot of my time doing. So I'm excited to talk about it today.
Thank you so much. Well, looking back at 2025 so far, how would you describe the overall health of the economy, both nationally and here in Texas?
Yeah, so nationally, I would describe it as decelerating but stable. So at the national level, for a long time now, we've seen a lot of macroeconomic data showing signs of a macroeconomic slowdown. Now, that doesn't mean that we're necessarily going into a recession, but it does mean that certain things like hiring slow down, and we've seen a deceleration in labor markets, and I think it's driven by a few things like the growth of AI that has basically replaced some portions of the labor market. We've seen this throughout history. It's technological advancements that basically allow workers to be more productive, and that tends to have a short-term impact on labor markets. So I think a lot of what we're seeing is that we're seeing a lot of policy uncertainty play out right now. That's caused, the global trade war. That's caused a lot of uncertainty that has decelerated hiring. A lot of businesses are waiting to see how it plays out before they may choose to expand their labor market or make capital expenditures. So I do think that the slower jobs growth is weighing on the economy. Here in Texas, I think we're affected by declining oil prices more than other states, and also immigration policy. We've had significant population growth through immigration in the last few years, and I think it's starting to impact the rate at which both our population grows and our economy grows. So those are the things kind of weighing on the state economy and the national economy.
Thank you so much. Just a quick comment that came in from Mark. He said some really good info from you and your research team. I appreciate the magazines. So just wanted to share that. As we go through, if you have questions for George, type those in. Of course, I have a lot of questions for him, but we'll get to as many of the live questions as we can. Now, interest rates, of course, have been such a big headline over the past year. What trends are you seeing now, and what might we expect heading into 2026?
Yeah, so interest rates are trending downward. Back in January, we had mortgage rates in excess of 7%, and now they're around 6.3. So a clear downward trend, I would say, at this point in interest rates. Throughout the year, we're at the back end here. We have about a month and a half left of 2025. So looking forward, here are a few things. So first of all, the Federal Reserve a few weeks ago announced a rate cut, and mortgage rates went up. That may be very surprising, but I think that to a large extent that kind of reflects the outlook on interest rates that the Federal Reserve did announce. They basically said that we're reducing short-term interest rates, but long-term interest rates, the long-term outlook for short-term rates may be a little less certain. So whereas this rate cut was expected, future rate cuts may not happen. So the Federal Reserve also announced another thing. The Federal Reserve announced that they were they were stabilizing their balance sheet. So that means that they're not going to, on net, be offloading any more of their assets. So what does that mean? Okay, so that means that interest rates are likely to not be affected anymore by Federal Reserve policy, at least long-term interest rates, things like treasuries and in particular mortgage rates. Mm-hmm. So they're still going to be offloading mortgages, but they're going to be using that money to buy treasuries. Okay, so what does that mean for the outlook? I expect that financial market conditions are going to be easing a little bit as a result. And my expectation is that interest rates begin to decline, or in some sense continue to decline over the next at least 6 months or so.
Okay. I mean, is there an estimation? I don't want you to go on record with a number, but is there an estimation of what we could expect, how low they could possibly get?
So that's a great question, because how would we even begin to start assessing where mortgage rates are relative to where they were, say, before the pandemic? So what economists like to look at is what's called the mortgage rate spread. That's the mortgage rate in excess of the 10-year Treasury rate. So the reason why so we have 30-year mortgages, but only a 10-year treasury rate. That's because most people tend to pay off on average their mortgages far faster than 30 years, or they may move, in which case, the mortgage loan kind of disappears. So that's why we focus so much on the 10-year treasury rate. So that spread is elevated right now. So that spread is right around, say, 2.2 or so percentage points. On average, that is about 1.5%. So I think that mortgage rates could at least come down another half a percentage point. And if the Federal Reserve stabilizes their holdings of mortgages, I think that we could see maybe at least 1 percentage point or so. And I think it'll eventually normalize around maybe 5%, maybe really optimistically 4.5%. The timeline to get there is a little bit uncertain, but maybe in the next few years.
Okay. Very good. Thank you. Moving into a little heavier of a question here, and you already kind of touched on it. Are we at risk of a recession in the next year?
Yeah, so let me start off by saying that at any given point in time, there's the possibility of a recession. What the pandemic showed us was that recessions can happen at any time and for any reason. So what do we know about recessions? A few things. So first of all, a recession, clearly a broad economic downturn. It's labeled as a recession by the National Bureau of Economic Research. So they have a group together. They look at a lot of data, and they'll say we have a recession or we don't have a recession. So, so the period of time in between recessions, that's an expansion. So expansions over time have been getting longer. So the duration in between recessions has been getting longer. In other words, recessions are becoming less frequent. So if you think back over the last 16 years since the Great Financial Crisis, we've only been in recession for 2 months. 2 months out of the last 16 years. So, and if we were to have a recession today, okay, so the last recession was the pandemic, right? April of 2020. If we were to have a recession today, it would be the shortest expansion in the last 40 years. So it just gives a sense of, how short the duration has been since the last recession. Again, they can happen at any time and for any reason. So at any given point in time, there is a risk. There are things that could pose a risk to the economy, things like, the escalating trade war, the kind of fallout from it. If that gets, if we haven't fully realized the extent of, trade policy, then it could lead to a downturn. My expectation, though, is that we have a fairly resilient economy and that maybe the likelihood is that this expansion has some time to grow.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for that. Now, the job market. How has the job market performed in Texas compared to the rest of the country? And also, are there any specific sectors that are showing, strength or signs of slowing?
Yeah, so Texas, just like the rest of the United States, is starting to slow down. We see that in the data. We see, and particularly in the jobs data, we see a slowdown. The good news is that Texas is still outperforming the rest of the United States. So even though we're slowing down, the national economy is slowing down, our rate of job growth is still about maybe close to a half a percentage point in excess of what it is at the national level. So that's very positive news. That said, it really depends on the industry. We could have at any given point in time good, industries that are performing better than others. Right now, we see kind of a slowdown in manufacturing, and I think that's at least partly the result of really low oil prices. Okay, so we had the government shutdown, and I know that news was breaking over the last 24 hours that may be coming to an end soon. But for right now, we really don't have a lot of data on what's happened over the last month or two. But what we do have is data that's collected by the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas. So they do a great job of assessing the business sentiment through their surveys. And what that survey data shows is that currently, and that has continued despite the government shutdown, the Federal Reserve kind of operates in a quasi-private way, or at least the district banks do. So the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas Manufacturing Index kind of shows a slowdown in the Texas state manufacturing sector. So we see kind of a slowdown there. So where are signs of growth? We see growth in education, healthcare, and to some extent financial services. So services are still growing in Texas. I think that's great news, and in particular, frankly, for the real estate community, because these are sectors where you don't need to be tied necessarily to a particular location. I mean, with the exception, of course, of education and healthcare, but financial services, that's one of the industries that is most capable of remote work. They have a very large share of remote workers, a large capacity for remote work. So when we see growth in that area, I think it's great, because that means that we have a large potential for domestic migration to the state of Texas. Remote work has been a big source of population growth for the state. It's been really something, I think, very good for the real estate community. And I think it's a positive sign when you see growth in that sector. So hopefully that'll be sustained in the coming years.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that sounds like good news, and we love some good news, especially on a Monday morning. What role is inflation playing right now in the housing market, especially in terms of affordability and consumer confidence?
Yeah, so affordability, in my opinion, really comes down to two things. One is interest rates. That affects your access to financing. Depending on the interest rate, it could be a major constraint. And if interest rates go down, you can refinance, and that tends to make whatever home you live in more affordable. The second is relative housing inflation. So what I mean by that is how much are houses becoming more expensive relative to other things like wages and the price of other things. So if housing inflation, if home prices are rising, but wages aren't quite keeping up, then that makes housing a lot less affordable. So what we see right now, of course, interest rates, we talked about that a few minutes ago. Those have been trending downward, a very positive kind of development for housing affordability. We're still well above where we were, certainly during the pandemic, but before the pandemic, we're still above interest rates that we had then. So those interest rates are trending downward. Hopefully affordability will improve. Housing inflation has come down. We see that both in Texas and at the national level. That has been decelerating, so that has been improving. Breaking over the last few days is the possibility of a 50-year mortgage loan. So that is potentially a big development in the real estate community. So when I assess my early assessment of the introduction of a 50-year mortgage, and it'll take some time to kind of digest it, but my thought is that this isn't something that's going to necessarily hurt affordability. I don't think it's going to hurt access to housing. More options are usually better. We'll wait and see what ends up happening, but it could improve affordability. I know that 50 years is a really long time, and it's met with some objection. But I do think that having access to more options isn't something that's going to necessarily constrain consumers as much as people might think. And one important thing to remember is that housing for low-income households is the biggest source of wealth. So if you own your house, that is the biggest source of wealth for the bottom 80% of households. So access to housing is a means to wealth accumulation. And so thinking about the outlook, I hope it turns into a very positive development.
Wonderful. Actually, we had a question from Elias about the 50-year mortgages, asking how would it affect the real estate industry as we know it? So it sounds like the answer really is maybe potential more access to affordability. Do you see any other potential outcomes?
Yeah, of course, when you start hearing about 50-year mortgages, it's met with some resistance because people think of 50 years as being a really long time, and you think about amortization schedules. You're paying a lot of interest very early on. But the reality is that 30-year mortgages are still an option. This isn't going to take 30-year mortgages off the table. It just gives the option of a 50-year mortgage. So, I go back to the thought, and I try to be very critical of new ideas as any person taking a scientific approach to anything should take. So but I had trouble coming up with big arguments against the 50-year mortgage in the sense that I don't think that this is something that's going to hinder access to capital. I don't think it's something that's going to hinder affordability. My hope is that it improves access to housing and helps people, access home ownership. So I think that if I were to guess, I would say that this is something that's going to improve the home ownership rate. And so for the real estate community, my early assessment would be that this is something that's going to be overall positive.
Okay. Again, asking kind of your early assessment here. Again, Yeli was saying, and I don't know if this is something would the interest rate be higher on a 50-year mortgage, or is there no difference?
I think it would be higher. If you look at the spread between 30-year mortgages and 15-year mortgages, for example, 30-year mortgages tend to be a little bit higher than 15-year mortgages. If you kind of extrapolate that in the other direction, my anticipation would be that a 50-year mortgage would be higher than a 30-year mortgage, but that's not necessarily going to be the case. We'll see. 50 years is a long time, and we see this with treasuries. So when you're looking for a basis of comparison, you may want to ask, where else do we see these kinds of assets? You can look to treasury markets, and sometimes we have what's called a yield curve inversion, which means that longer term rates are actually, or the rates on long-term assets are actually lower than the rates on short-term assets. So it's not impossible by any stretch of the imagination that a 50-year interest rate could be less than a 30. Maybe we'll have to wait and see, but at least we see that in treasury markets. It'll be interesting to see how this plays out, though.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. Well, for realtors specifically, what economic indicators should they be keeping an eye on as we head into 2026?
Yeah, so I look a lot at labor market churn. That's what economists call hiring and separation. So during the pandemic and in the years following the pandemic, we had significant labor market churn, and people were moving quite a bit as a result of labor market churn. Maybe somebody would voluntarily or involuntarily leave their job and move to a new place, the geographic relocation. So I think that played a big role in sort of the real estate boom that we had in the years following the pandemic. Of course, we had super low interest rates too. But I keep an eye on labor market churn. There are known relationships between things happening in the labor market and things happening in real estate markets. So I keep an eye on that. Again, the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas provides really good business survey data on the outlook for hiring. So I pay very close attention to the hiring outlook data that's collected by the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas for the state of Texas. And by the way, this is something that I publish monthly in my monthly Texas Economic Outlook, and I discuss it. And again, it's something that I really try to keep an eye on to sort of gauge the business outlook here in the state of Texas. So right now, that has been improving. The second is the economic policy uncertainty. There's an index for this thing called the Economic Policy Uncertainty Index. What we see is that this plays a major role in business activity. So right now, economic policy uncertainty is very high. So we see a clear negative relationship between economic policy uncertainty and hiring. So when hiring when economic policy uncertainty is very high, the hiring outlook falls pretty significantly. So once we see that economic policy uncertainty has declined, I expect hiring to return to normalized levels. So that's something that I keep an eye on for the outlook for the economy and the outlook for the real estate community.
Yeah, makes sense. Thank you so much. Well, we've seen a lot of changes in migration patterns and population growth, as you mentioned earlier. How are these shifts affecting demand in the Texas housing market and also Houston specifically?
Yeah, so big impact. In Texas, over the last 3 years for which we had data, so this is census data. The most recent data, and we have big lags on this data. So the three most recent years that we have are 2022, 2023, and 2024. In each of those years, Texas had around 1.8% population growth. So pretty stable across those 3 years. What changed significantly was the composition of that population growth. In 2022, I think it was around 2/3 of our population growth came from domestic migration. That means people moving to Texas from other states.
Mhm.
By 2024, that had entirely reversed, and almost all of our population growth had come from international migration. So migration, I expect, is something that, it's very much dependent on federal policy. Both we see border enforcement numbers, they have dramatically changed over the last few months. There's the new H-1B visa, the fee that's assessed to H-1B visas. We'll see how that one plays out. I don't think it's something that is going to necessarily significantly increase immigration, but just given the extent to which Texas depends on migration, both domestic migration and international migration, I think it's going to have a big impact. Now, Houston in particular, has a very large share of foreign-born residents. This is something. So I had the privilege of presenting to an audience at HAR's Global Day, and we spent a lot of time talking about migration. Houston has around 25% of the population is foreign-born. That's very, very high. And it's higher in certain counties. So in Harris County, if I remember correctly, it's right around 25%. It's a little bit higher in Fort Bend County and a little bit lower in Montgomery County. And depending on the region, it may be higher or lower. But very, very high share of population growth is dependent on international migration. So we could see it start to disproportionately affect the metropolitan areas, and in particular Houston and in the state as well. But a little bit of a positive outlook. We're still seeing significant domestic migration, and that data comes from the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas. I pay a lot of attention to what they provide. If you listen to some of the talks that some of their that sort of outreach economists, their business economists have given recently, they're painting a picture of declining but sustained domestic migration, and the data that they have is actually from the credit rating agencies that track address changes, and so they're able to kind of assess what domestic migration is almost in real time. And so that is still strong. Certainly the hope is that as the economy improves, that will continue to improve as well. So a little bit of a silver lining here.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Well, George, if you had to give a 60-second forecast for 2026, what would you highlight as the biggest themes for realtors that they should prepare for?
Yeah, so near term, possibility of a continued slowdown. If I had to guess, I would say that we'll see GDP at the national level kind of slow down, economic output kind of continue to slow down. I would expect, if we get some clarity on economic policy, that there's a job market rebound, say by the middle of 2026. I expect mortgage rates will continue to fall. If I had to just, again, crystal balling here, put a number on it, my guess would be around 5.75%, so 5.75%. And with regards to housing prices, we do have a forecast model. My anticipation is that we'll see around 1 to 2% home price increase.
Okay. Very good. Thank you so much. Well, George, this has been fabulous. Where can our members go to learn more about your work or follow updates from the Real Estate Center? And also there was a question. I know you mentioned the Federal Reserve of Dallas. Kevin was also asking for more information that's hyper-local information. For example, he serves the Woodlands and Montgomery County area.
Yeah. All right. So, fellow Woodlands residents, I'm up here right now. The super granular data, in particular for the Woodlands, if you wanted to, I don't know that there's any way to just see the statistic, but I can tell you that the data provided by the census does have what's called public use micro area, PUMA. And there are specific designations for different parts of the Woodlands. So, for example, the part of the Woodlands that's in Montgomery County, I think, has its own designation. There's the Creekside area that I think has that may be joined with other areas of Harris County that surround it. But I've looked for the same thing. I'm a resident of the Woodlands, and that is the best that I've been able to find, the public use micro area data. You may so one last thing that and I'm having trouble remembering whether it's the Bureau of Economic Analysis or the Census Bureau, but I think it's the Census Bureau that does provide like a some kind of a dashboard for a very granular region. So they may have something for the Woodlands area and any area of the country, really. So I would look to the census website. Even though the government is shut down and the website is not currently updated, I think that it's at least still available to look at this data.
Okay. Very good. And we did share the link to your website. You want to tell us about your website as well and the information they can find there?
Yeah. So our website is TRERC. So that's Texas Real Estate Research Center .tamu.edu. There you can find all of the research products that we produce. I produce a Texas Economic Outlook monthly report where we really just spend almost probably 2/3 of it just talking about the national level economic outlook. We talk about interest rates, and then we talk a lot about what's happening here in the state of Texas. Our social media accounts, we have an X account at RE Center TX. We're also on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. And of course, if you have any questions or have any interest in following up on any of this, please feel free to reach out to me directly. My email address is jbarro, JBARRO @tamu.edu.
Very good. And I will go ahead and also mention har.com/newsroom. We produce reports weekly. A lot of that data actually comes from the Real Estate Center at Texas A&M University. So we appreciate working with you guys and getting that data to our members on a weekly basis. And we can put that link in the the newsroom link in the comments as well. Well, George, again, this has been wonderful. We really appreciate your time this morning. There was, I couldn't say it better myself, a comment here from Tracy. She said, "Thank you, George, for the optimistic market insight and for giving us great talking points to start conversations as we head into the holidays. We know how those holiday party goes. Everybody wants to know how's the market, how's real estate, what's going on." So we really do appreciate your time, George, and all of the valuable insights you shared today.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Absolutely. Well, that is it for this Member Focus Monday. Next week, we will be talking about important benefits for HAR members and HAR MLS subscribers. So be sure to tune in to hear from Sally Snook and find out about some benefits that you might be missing out on. Until then, have a great week. Bye-bye.